Welcome to Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, an endurance athlete journey podcast series. I'm your coach for this journey, and if triathlon has ever felt confusing, intimidating, or out of reach, that's exactly why this series exists. You don't need to be fearless, you don't need to have perfect fitness, and you definitely don't need to have everything figured out yet. What you need is a clear plan, honest guidance, and the confidence that comes from taking the right steps in the right order. In this series, we'll strip away the hype, focus on smart progression, and help you build confidence before distance, so that triathlon fits into your life, not the other way around. Whether this is your first race or your first time even considering one, you're in the right place. Let's get to work. Welcome, everyone, to our third installment of Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, and I want to walk back to what we covered in the first two episodes of this series. In episode 1, we talked about how to pick a appropriate race distance for a beginner triathlete. In that conversation, I had recommended that we start with sprint triathlons, but if you want to go back and review that, and if you haven't seen it yet, I would definitely recommend going back into episode 1 and giving that a listen to. We talked about, briefly what triathlon is. And in episode 2, we progressed the conversation to another big question that I get from athletes is, how good of a swimmer do I need to be? And we talked about all kinds of different things like, wetsuit selections, what it takes to kind of get through the training and get through race day, and just kind of trying to alleviate some of the stress and pressures that come from that particular component of your day. So today we're going to progress the conversation a little bit further. And another big question that I get from athletes is, how fit do I actually have to be before I start? This is one of those things that you kind of hear many people say when they want to join a gym. Sometimes you get the statements like, I kind of need to get in shape a little bit before I go work out, which is kind of counterintuitive if you think about it, because going to the gym and working out is how you get fit and get into shape. So the same principle applies to this particular sport. And so today we're going to cover this conversation and we're going to talk about the difference between ideal fitness and minimum fitness that you would need. And we're going to talk about trying to close that gap of people's perception of what ideal fitness is and what it would require for you to start your journey. We're going to continue the conversation. We're going to talk about why the training actually exists as an extension for what that minimum fitness needs to be. And then we're going to go into looking at the 3 different pieces of the triathlon, so swim, bike, and run. And we're going to talk about some of the benchmarks that I would recommend and that I use for my athletes when I work with them as they're starting off in their journey, just to kind of give them the starting point on kind of like where we're building up and what kind of thresholds and benchmarks that you can look for in order to pull the trigger on your first race. Then we're going to talk about the mix of intensity and consistency within a training plan. And we're going to blow apart some of the myths that come from this intensity focus. And this is common with new athletes, people, especially people that are self-coached and they really don't have a whole lot of insight and experience on how to formulate a training plan and do this logical progression in their preparation. And then we're going to end the conversation on what you can expect for race day. I'm going to try and smooth out some of the fears and anxiety that come from race day alone, and to just encourage you and support you and give you some keys that you can use on your race day to control the mental and the emotional side of what that's going to be like. All right. So without further ado, let's dive into this topic. And so I'm going to talk first about minimum fitness and ideal fitness. Ideal fitness is really what you see when you scroll through social media. Many people, including myself, you'll scroll through and you'll see people finishing races, strong, and you'll see them on top of podiums, and you'll see them video clips and pictures that they basically look like pros, and they're just like gliding along, no issues, no problems, and they're just smooth. Now, these videos and pictures are selected for a purpose, right? I would dare say that this is what the average triathlete experiences. That is just a snapshot in time, just one particular moment. And by no means is this a benchmark that you need to meet or surpass in order to start your journey, right? So let's talk about what you need just at a minimum. And under the realization that people are uniquely different, you can have individuals that just are gifted, and that's great for them. Then you have people that are not so gifted, but they work really hard at what they want, and they put in the work. Not that the gifted people don't put in the work, but it's just a different level. It's just a different feel. And I can tell you, when I first started this sport, I had only been running for close to a year. I had had gastric bypass surgery, so I had weight loss surgery. I spent a year to maybe a year and a half building some base fitness so that I can move my body. After years of really not being able to because of my weight, I spent a lot of time trying to reintroduce and to build a foundation in which I could move. Once I reached that point, I started to run and do more aerobic conditioning. And so when I signed up for my first race, it was a duathlon. And I think I talked about this kind of like in the first episode, because I really wasn't ready to swim yet. But even when I signed up for my first full sprint triathlon, I had only been running for about a year. I had only done one 5K and a 10K. When I got into the pool, I could only swim 25 yards at a time. So that meant I could swim from one side of the pool to the other, and then that was it. And then I would have to take a break, rest, and then swim back. I had no concern or no perception or idealization of what stroke mechanics were in the pool, what it meant to have a proper swim stroke, breathing. I was just breathing however I could just to get the oxygen in. I had no appreciation for bilateral breathing, proper head position. None of that stuff mattered. I was just interested in getting from point A to point B. And I knew that it didn't have to be pretty. I knew it didn't have to be efficient. And honestly, I really didn't care. I just wanted to get in and out of the water as effectively as I could so that I could move on with the day. That was all I was concerned about. The bike that I had was a donated Schwinn mountain bike, probably bought from Walmart. A friend of mine didn't want the bike anymore, and he just gave it to me. It was probably the heaviest bike on the planet. It was ridiculous. And my first race was in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is a pretty hilly area, a pretty mountainous area. And so that was definitely a true test of leg strength, was trying to push this mountain bike up these big hills on the road, no less. But honestly, I look back on it today, and we're talking like over a decade later, and I'm glad I had the experience. Did I really care that I was riding a mountain bike instead of a road bike? Aero bars, aero helmets, and race wheels and all this stuff. None of that stuff mattered. Man, I just jumped on the bike and just went for it and did my race. Honestly, that was all I was concerned about. I had no concern for aerodynamics and power and cadence and all this other stuff. All that stuff comes later, honestly. So that's kind of where I started. And, if I were to tie back some of the previous episodes in this series, if I had waited until I felt ready, or, if I felt more comfortable in the swim, or if I would waited until I was quote unquote a better swimmer, I would have never signed up for the triathlon. Uh, it would have kept me on the sidelines. And so what I had was enough to get started. And I believe that that is true for most people out there today who have these same concerns and worries and insecurities in starting their journey, because they don't feel like either they're fit enough, or they don't have the right stuff, or they're afraid of failure, or whatnot. And I just encourage you to take what you do have and use it to the best of your ability and move forward from there. All the other stuff comes later. And honestly, if I'm truly honest with you, I would say today, after all of the races that I've done and all the experiences that I've had, if I could go back to that time where it was fresh and new and I'm just getting started, I would love to have that feeling again. Because as you progress through this journey, you start to form expectations on yourself, and you start to feel like maybe others have expectations of you as well. And then you start to be concerned, it's like, what's my power, and what's my heart rate? What's my cadence? What's my arm turnover in the water? How efficient am I in the water? Do I need a brand new wetsuit? All this other stuff, man, it really starts to compound, and it sometimes feels like it takes the joy out of the experience and the journey. So it's like you want to go back to the time where you felt it was the most pure. I can say that those are my best experiences, and something that I wish I could get today. And whether that's possible, I don't really know. But if you have not pulled that trigger yet, I'm fairly confident in saying that those first few races that you're going to do are probably going to feel the most free. They're going to be the best races that you have. And I think the enjoyment level of the experience is what I would call more pure, rather than, coming home and analyzing your race day and looking at run pace and did I negative split? Did I progress the run, or whatever? I can just encourage you just to get started. All right. So we can look at where our fitness is right now in the current moment, and we build from there. So one of the running themes in this series is that triathlon is not just a test. It's not a destination. To me, this sport is more of a process or a journey. So it makes sense that because this is a journey, there is an accumulation of fitness, experience, wisdom that has to be accumulated over time. And so when you start your training, you should start it from the perspective that you're not fit yet. That's why you're doing the training, right? Training starts with where you are. If you start your training plan where you want to be, or where you feel like you should be, I would argue that that sets you up either for disappointment, frustration, or injury. So you start where you're at. If this means that your run is mostly walking, start there. If it means that you swim from one end of the pool to the other and you take a break, start there. If it means that you just get on your bike and you ride easy, and it's like kind of like a whether it's a leisurely ride or one where you feel like you could have a conversation to the person next to you, start there, right? We're not trying to prove to ourselves today that we can complete a race that we're training for sometime in the future, right? So our training plans are designed to be intentionally progressive. They build adaptation over time with a purpose of performance, whether that performance would just be enough to complete the race or meet some kind of performance metric or expectation that you have. That's how training plans are designed. They're built for adaptation, not just for survival. So what we're looking for is we're looking to build capacity over time. Now, what do I mean by capacity? There's muscular capacity and then there's aerobic capacity. So the muscular capacity is how strong your muscles and tendons are in order for it to absorb the aerobic capacity that you're trying to accumulate. The reason that I say it this way is because over the years, I know that strength training is a vital piece to any endurance athlete's training plan. Now, the reason that I know this and I'm confident in this is because I have experienced it myself, the consequences and costs associated with ignoring that piece of the training plan. Now, you could be saying there is functional strength that you can build. Now, functional strength means we're getting stronger using movements that are relevant to our sport of choice. For running, that would mean running hills. For biking, that would mean big gear work. So low cadence, high strength efforts. So it's like you're climbing a mountain. In the pool, it means swimming with paddles to increase resistance during the swim stroke, using fins to create resistance for a more powerful and efficient kick. Those are examples of how we accumulate functional strength. Now, I believe that there is a place for that in the training plan. I know it without a doubt. However, there is only so much strength that you can accumulate and build from those types of activities. When you pair the functional strength with what I would call non-functional strength or resistance-based training, i.e. like weight room, using weights, dumbbells, barbells, if you're using bands and you're just talking about banded movements, those things pair well with the functional strength. And there is a time and place for both of those. Now, in order to build the aerobic capacity that you need for race day, you have to have the muscular capacity and strength to endure the training for the aerobic side. So that's going to be an important piece to your training plan. We also build training plans with the realization that there's either going to be mistakes. And when I say mistakes, it could be, the body doesn't react in a way that you expect it to react or that you would hope that it would act. And therefore, there's going to be some manipulation of future workouts to accommodate for the body not progressing as quickly as you had hoped it would. Whether you ended up getting hurt, let's say that you're running and you don't engage your core and now you've got a little bit of a stiff back because when you fail to engage the core, the body pulls its stability from the lower back and now your back is stiff, which is going to have an impact on the bike. There's this down river effect to that. So then we have to accommodate future workouts so that the body can recover and allow you to progress. Training plans are living organisms. They change all the time. And that's what's really helpful when you have a coach, is that you have somebody there to adapt your training plan that has the experience and the wisdom to know how to do that and when to do that, and how to sequence workouts in a way that allows you to progress with less risk. Because what we're wanting to do is we want to build a familiarity with the sport and the movements that you're going to rely on for race day. So we use the training plan and these workouts so that you have this sense of what this stuff is going to feel like. What's it going to feel like running? What's it going to feel like biking? And what's it going to feel like swimming? What's it going to feel like trying to run off the bike? And these sort of things is why we train, right? We don't want to go into race day without some kind of idea on, what's this swim going to feel like? I have no idea. Well, that's a really bad place to be in. Race day in itself brings a lot of nerves and anxiety and insecurity and being unsure. Why compound that with poor preparation so that you have even more surprises to deal with on race day? So this is why we train the way that we do. All right. So the reason that I encourage athletes to start at the sprint distance rather than starting at, let's say, the Olympic or international or even the half Ironman or, God forbid, the full Ironman as your first triathlon, is because sprint races are designed for the beginner. They're designed to introduce people to a sport and allow them just for completion, if that's where you are. That's not saying that an experienced athlete go to a sprint and just have the expectation that they're going to finish. That's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, I highly encourage experienced, long-time athletes that regularly race long course, which means anything between a 70.3 to a 140.6 distance triathlon. I highly encourage them to go back to the sprint distance. It's not an easy distance by any means. It's only as easy as you allow it to be. But there are different skill sets that are utilized at that distance that are not employed with longer course racing. So for the beginner, knowing that these races are designed and developed to introduce you to a sport, it seems logical that that's where we would start. Now, we've talked about what the difference is between minimum fitness and ideal fitness. So as a refresher and as a reminder, minimum fitness is exactly what it sounds like. It is the floor that you need to meet, or that I would recommend that you meet. Ideal fitness is an example, is that long-term athlete going back to the sprint distance race and performing there. That's what you would call like, okay, that's ideal, right? Ideal is the point where you are in a position to overlay performance expectations on race day because you've trained in such a way that has prepared you to meet those expectations. That's ideal. Minimum is when the athlete signs up and says, all I want to do is I just want to finish the race. Man, I just want to get in the water and get out of the water as quickly as possible. Doesn't have to be pretty, but it has to be effective. I want to get on the bike and just pedal. I have no concept of speed, cadence, power, none of it. I just want to get from the mount line to the dismount line as quickly and as possible. For the run, I just want to survive the run or execute a plan that I have trained for, whether that means that you run the whole thing or you use some kind of like run walk protocol to get you from mile 1, 2, 3, whatever your strategy is and method. That's what I would call your minimum fitness that would be required. Let's look at each of these disciplines within the sport and say, what are benchmarks that we can use to determine our readiness. So let's start with the swim. You don't have to have perfect technique. All you need is the ability to remain composed during the swim. As we talked about in episode 2, you can stop when you need to, float if you need to, just to reset your composure. You can use a combination of swim strokes, whatever it takes to get from point A to point B. Keeping those in mind, what I would say is if you can swim from one end of the pool to the other, now whether that be in yards or meters, if you can swim 25 yards or 25 meters, and that's your starting point, then I would say that that's a pretty solid benchmark that you can use to determine your readiness. Your ability to extend beyond the 25 meters and start to accumulate more distance is going to be a function of how you train and how structured and purposeful your training really is. But if you can swim anywhere between 25 to 100 yards or meters, then I think that that's a pretty decent benchmark. I have worked with athletes where we haven't covered the 25 yards to start. Start from one end of the pool and they make it about halfway, and then they kind of have to like reset themselves and roll over and float or catch their breath or whatever. And that's fine. That's where we started from. These particular athletes that I've worked with, where they were in that situation, they still finished their race. And that is a big testament for their drive and commitment to getting better and their commitment to finishing race day, despite starting their starting point and their concern on, well, this is where I'm starting from, but we all have to start somewhere, right? But they still finished race day, and you can't ask for anything more than that. Your breathing does not have to be textbook and perfect, whether that means that you've got a textbook breathing skill where you got one goggle lens out of the water and you're just rotating and you're grabbing in those short little breaths and right back down in the swim stroke, or if you're popping your head and your legs are dropping and all that kind of stuff, or if you just have to breathe every stroke, whatever. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be effective, right? Swimming is an aerobic sport. It requires oxygen. What I don't want you doing is holding your breath. That defeats the purpose, and that's going to make things even harder. So breathing doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be effective, right? So I think that if you want more information on really kind of the swim part specifically, I would recommend that you go back to episode 2. It's a bit of a longer episode because there's a lot of content and a lot of information that I cover in that episode. So I don't want to cover too much here because it's just going to repeat what I did in the previous episode. So go back, check that one out. For the bike, right? The bike is the longest portion of any of the triathlon distances, and some would say is probably the most forgiving. I could argue that the bike is probably where a lot of people sabotage their race because they overextend their effort on the bike because they get on it and they're just like, they're excited and the adrenaline's flowing and they ride as hard as they can. And they ride as a cyclist. However, we are not cyclists. We are triathletes. So we have to ride in a manner that still allows us to run. So in fact, I think that cyclists in triathlons have to be a lot more disciplined than just single sport cyclists because we have to ride with this discipline that we are holding back just slightly so that we still have legs to run on. Or I would say that they can be actually stronger than cyclists because they have to accumulate the fitness that allows them to ride hard and run afterwards. So really, when you're starting off with triathlon and you're starting your journey, you're kind of coming into the bike with some previous experience. I think most of us as children probably had a bike. And so most people would know how to at least ride one and get on it and get it moving. I believe that's not the same as for the swim because, when I first started in triathlon, I could swim, but I didn't know how to like swim in a competitive way. I knew how to, get from the pool one end to the other as kind of like a leisurely effort. It's like you're just splashing around in the pool or whatever. You know how to swim, but you really don't know how to really swim. I hope that makes sense. But there is a difference between knowing how to swim, i.e. just getting in the pool and kind of splashing around and you can, tread water or whatever. You have a swim stroke that allows you to get from one end to the other. However, that's different than swimming in a way that competitive swimmers swim as a way to cover distance and manage effort. I hope that makes sense. But for the bike, most people are coming into it with some kind of prior experience. And for beginners, really all that you really need to focus on is just getting time on the seat. That's really it as a minimum, because you're going to get on that seat and it's going to be uncomfortable, especially if you're on it for a period of time. Now, we've probably all kind of gone to like cycle classes and stuff like that, gyms and that type of experience. So if you can imagine that experience in the cycle room, going to a class on how that bike seat started to get uncomfortable. Now, bike seats on real bikes are different. Extra padding does not make a bike seat more comfortable. A proper bike seat is what makes it comfortable for you. A bike seat that fits your bone structure is what makes it comfortable. Just adding more padding can actually make the situation worse. So people that put like these gel covers over their bike seats and things, they're trying to stack on more padding. I tend to caution people with that because it's really not making the difference that they really hoped it would. Plus, your bike shorts that you're going to be wearing that day have padding on them. So getting that time in the saddle to toughen up the undercarriage a little bit by being on the bike. And that's really the primary focus for new athletes that are just kind of getting started. And that's what my focus is with them, is we're just trying to be on the bike, stay on the bike, and be fairly comfortable while on it over an extended period of time. That's the extent that I think that you really should be able to meet. And if you start off and it's uncomfortable, that's a common experience and it's nothing to be concerned about. It's not enough to keep you from participating. The reason is because this is why we train. This is why we're going to be on the bike throughout the training period, is to build that comfortability and the fitness that's going to be required. So the last one is the run. Let's say if you can run the 5K, that's great. If you can run seconds and walk for a minute, that'll get you through race day. You just have to know where you're starting from and develop a training method that progresses you without overloading you. That's the key difference. And that's where a coach comes in handy, in knowing how to progress that athlete in a way that minimizes risk, because the run is the most demanding of the three sports. And the reason, because that is full impact. Your body is absorbing 5 times your body weight with every foot strike on the ground. For walking, it's probably closer to like 3 to 3.5 times your body weight. And so if you're going into it after not really a whole lot of running experience, your body's going to react to that new impact and those new demands that it's putting on it. So, your knees can be a little bit sore, your glutes and your hips are going to be sore, your ankles may be sore. So all of these things, it's normal, right? But that's why using run walk protocols for a new athlete is important. You don't have to be able to run the entire distance in order to do the race. Um, I've employed run walk protocols in my own racing. There have been situations where I've been managing issues, and rather than just sit on the sideline and not race and wait for me to be quote unquote 100%, just wasn't it wasn't something that I was looking for. Well, wasn't looking into. I wanted to race, and I knew that I could implement a strategy and a method that still allowed me to do what I wanted to do in a way that didn't make things worse and still kept me moving. So during the run, you're going to have heavy legs because you're coming off of the bike. Those first few minutes of coming off the bike while you run, it's going to feel weird, which is why we practice that in training, where we have what are called brick workouts, where, you ride first and then you run second. And so we practice those transitions, and we try and do those in the appropriate place of the training plan. Doesn't have this, it should not be done from day one of your training plan. There is a specific purpose and place for these types of workouts in your progression. But it is important to practice before race day so that you know what it's going to feel like. No surprises on race day, right? So the goal for the run is forward progress. That's what really matters ultimately, right? It matters on how you get from point A to point B. Because as long as you're moving forward, then you're getting closer to the finish line. Whether that means that you're running, whether it means you're run walking, or if it just means that you're purely walking, it does not matter. As long as you can get from point A to point B in the best way that you could possibly do it within the cutoff times for the race, then that's all that matters. All right. So let's talk about intensity. And this is probably one of the most important concepts in this entire Triathlon 101 series. And the reason that I say this is that new athletes that are coming into the sport, sometimes they can get a little carried away and have too much intensity in their workouts. It's almost as if they feel like every single workout has to be done as hard as it can be done, right? So it means that, if I'm going to run, I need to run as fast as I can, or I need to pedal the bike as hard as I can. So I'm going to put on the most amount of gear that I can and try and go as fast as I can with a really slow cadence because of it. So the reason I want to caution against that, because there is a time and there's a place for intensity in the training plan. This is going to be very athlete specific on how I implement intensity within an athlete's training plan is going to be a function of where they are in their journey. For a new athlete, for somebody who's doing kind of their first race, I may not give them any intensity at all, because this is the race where we're not looking for performance. We're really looking for completion. So if we're not really looking for performance, there's no reason to overlay performance metrics or some kind of target on that athlete that they have to achieve. I just want them to get from point A to point B, and that's it. So many of the workouts are going to be what I would call it this zone 2 effort. This is an effort in which you can sustain that for a long period of time, more than an hour, right? So if that means that your run is more of a jog, then that's your zone 2 effort. That's the effort that we're looking for during training. If you're the bike, the effort that I'm looking for is a conversational effort. If you could have a conversation with somebody riding beside you, that's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for nice, consistent, steady pedaling of the bike. So the intensity stuff comes later. I believe that it's not appropriate at the beginner phase. I'm more interested in consistency, because the consistency is what builds the foundation in which intensity can be applied. So I want to repeat that. Consistency is the foundation on which intensity can be applied. Consistency means that we are able to do today's workout in a manner that allows us to do tomorrow's workout. And today's workout is a function of what we did yesterday. That's consistency. I'm not saying that consistency is not taking days off or doing, appropriate rest days. That's not what I'm saying at all. Because there can be a time and place for that. But if I give an athlete a workout that then requires them to take multiple days off in order for them to recover from that effort, then I've done them a disservice. That's not the appropriate approach to use for this type of training. So when we use intensity as our primary focus in our training plan, it is common to see increases of injuries. So you're now increasing your risk profile for injury. It's common to see burnout because you're not able to recover. And so you're going into future workouts kind of run down, and that wears on you. And so you're more likely to just say, look, this is just too hard. So it reinforces this mindset that this sport is too hard or that the training is too hard. If that is what you're experiencing, then you have too much intensity in your training plan, and you need to take a look on how that's structured. Again, this is where a good coach can come in and help you with that and apply intensity in the appropriate places. And when you have intensity as your primary focus, sometimes this can reinforce this fear that the sport is just too hard. And so when we shift our focus from intensity first to consistency first, our primary focus now is on aerobic development. So we're building this aerobic engine, right? And I believe I talked about this. It was either in another podcast episode or one of these other episodes, is that we want to build an aerobic engine that is going to be supported by our muscular strength. This means that if you don't have the muscular endurance to sustain the aerobic conditioning, then that's something that you're going to have to focus on. So it's like putting a Ferrari engine in a Honda Civic. It just doesn't work. So what we want is we want to develop our aerobic capacity while at the same time building the muscular endurance to sustain that capacity. When you're able to do this, this builds confidence in you because you're achieving workouts. You're doing things that you thought were going to be too hard for you to do, and you see yourself actually completing this training. And so that is a big boost of confidence, and you can use that going into race day. When you focus on consistency over intensity when you're first starting out, this is what I believe builds sustainability in the sport. A lot of times when you see people implementing this intensity first, they're really kind of like this one event and done mentality. It's just one and done. They're not interested in building a sustainable, quote unquote, career in this to where they can do this over long periods of time. But that may not be their goal. But I can say that if you want this to be a true journey, then you have to have the sustainability piece as a foundation, because without it, you can't. And when you focus on being consistent, this is what allows the journey to be sustainable. One thing that I do see from athletes is that success is not built on these breakthrough epic workouts. And this is typically seen by athletes who want, all kinds of variety. They want different workouts every single day, every single week. Everything's changing all the time. Rarely does that generate sustainable performance. Going into it with the mindset that you have to have these epic, big breakthrough workouts all the time is what's keeping you from progressing, because success is built on hundreds of just average workouts. It's not the big breakthrough epic ones that matter most. It's all of the little ones that you have done that were just kind of run of the mill, just normal Tuesday. That is what generates success in the sport, because you're doing it just over and over and over again. You're laying this foundation, you're building this engine, and this is what really matters. And this is what generates true success and performance in the sport. So now let's talk about race day. What are kind of the expectations that you're going to have? Because we've gone into this with some minimum fitness, but we've trained now and we are prepared, right? So we no longer have the same level of fitness that we had on day one. We have something that's greater than that. And so now let's talk about what race day is going to feel like. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be unsure. I can tell you that. But that insecurity is easily wiped away just by relying on what you did during training, the consistency of your training, the fitness that you accumulated. All you have to do is just tell yourself, look, I just went through all this training. Am I nervous? Yes, but I'm trusting the process that I've been through to get me through this day. You're not going to, have these crazy efficient transitions. They're going to feel awkward. I don't want to say it's chaotic, but it's common for athletes to have this fear, like, what have I forgotten? And it's just like, I need this. I need that. And I need this too. This is common on race day. What I tell the athletes that I work with is just, look, this is just stay calm. Let's breathe through it. We've practiced this. This is why we practice this during training. If you get to the point where it's just like, oh, well, I messed this up, then you messed it up. Take it, learn from it, and implement a change next time. That's it. So just tell yourself that mistakes or things that weren't done, quote unquote, properly or as well as it went in training, then take those experiences, because those experiences are extremely valuable, right? These are things that you can draw on in future events. And you're just like, oh, I remember when this happened. This is how I'm going to fix that. And you can become better prepared for next time. So there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be times where, you bike too hard or you swam too hard and the run just really fell apart because the effort that you expended during the swim and the bike was beyond what should have been. And so now your run is going to suffer. There's going to be mistakes, right? And this is why we take these experiences and we do not forget them. We incorporate them into our training and say, okay, well, this is how now we need to practice this going forward so that we don't repeat those same mistakes. If you get into the run and your goal was to run the whole thing, but then you realize it's like, man, I'm going to have to walk something, then walk it. It's fine. You'll see pros walk. Nothing to be ashamed of whatsoever. Purposeful walking and properly placed periods of walking during the run is strategic. It's not a sign of weakness or a failure to prepare adequately for the day's event and the performance that's going to be necessary. It's purposeful strategy. So walking is not a sign that you did not prepare adequately for race day. So one of the things that I like to tell athletes, and this a little mantra, is We're just going to control the controllables. We're going to control those things that we can control, and that's going to be my effort and my attitude. Those are the two things that we can control. Everything else, beyond your control. What's the weather going to be like on race day? Is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it windy? Ultimately, you hope that it's sunny with no wind, and then you can really perform, quote unquote, perform up to your expectations. But when that wind creeps in or the roads get wet because it's raining, now you have an adjustment. So what we can control then is our effort and our decision making. Where am I going to ride on the road if the roads are wet? Well, I'm going to stay away from, the white lines because those are going to be the slickest part of the road. And I'm going to ride to the right away from the middle of the road. So I'm staying to the right, but I'm staying to the left of the white lines, and I'm going to control my effort, and I'm going to stay here and look ahead, looking for potholes, looking for obstructions and things that I have to manage as I ride along. I want you to be able to make reasonable decisions in the moment, because triathlon can easily be described as getting a master's degree or a PhD in crisis management. That is probably how I would classify triathlon, because you're going to be forced to make all these little decisions as you progress throughout the day. And it's the accumulation of these little decisions are going to have a significant impact on your performance and the result at the end of the day. So if I can make you a better decision maker, then I'm setting you up for more success. And by not experiencing certain things during training, I'm actually doing you a disservice, because you don't have that experience now to draw on to make the proper decision on race day. And the next thing that I would probably say to define what a successful race day is, we're staying calm, we're making good decisions. We're just taking care of ourselves. Whether I've seen experienced athletes making tough calls to not finish a race because the conditions that they were in were just too much. Brutally hot races, humid races, things like that. This is the kind of decision that you're going to have to make to take care of yourself while out there. Is like, well, is it really worth the risk of me continuing and doing some really bad, some significant damage to myself just to finish the race? That's a question that only you can answer. I will say that the mind is probably the one thing that keeps people from finishing that don't finish. A lot of times the body gives out before the mind does. So if you can remain strong mentally, a lot of times your body will go along for the ride. So if you can become mentally strong, then that can get you through those tough times where you're thinking, man, I can't do this. My legs are cooked, or, whatever it is that's going on, you have to reframe that, and you have to say, no, I've trained for this. I'm prepared for this. I know this is going to feel hard. It should feel hard, because this is something that I never thought that I could do, but I trained for it and prepared for it. And so now I just have to just trust that what I did was enough. But only you can make the decision on, what it is that you feel is enough. And just finishing the race before the cutoff is a solid criteria to use to define your success for the day. Doesn't matter necessarily like what your pace was on the run, or what your power was on the bike, or how fresh you felt getting out of the water. Those things are nice, and they can be criteria that you can use to evaluate your success for the day. But I don't believe that it's appropriate for beginners. I think that that's more relevant for experienced athletes that have been doing this for a little bit. And really, the beginner should just be primarily focused on finishing the race and learning as much as they possibly can during these first few races, because we're not trying to prove anything. You may be trying to prove to yourself that you can do this, which is valid and is reasonable, but you don't have to prove to anybody else that you can do this in your first few races. Your goal is just to get out there, learn as much as you possibly can, and finish the race. So if you've listened to episodes 1 and 2 of this series, you'll know that you'll see a common theme that we talk about: fear of unknown, so some level of insecurity. We've talked about fear of being judged and evaluated by others, which is common in today's world of social media, and fear of failure. Now, failure is going to be a function of however you define it as failure. Walking during the run, not failure. You may have an expectation that you want to run the entire thing, and if you don't, then you can use that as criteria for quote unquote not meeting your expectations, but I wouldn't classify that as a failure. Triathlon isn't something that you pass or fail at. Think of it in terms of something that you're stepping into. I think if you can reframe this and really focus on not this pass fail, this binary result, ones and zeros, and it was either I succeeded for the day or I failed the day. If you can reframe that and look at it in terms of these are the things that went well, these are the things that didn't necessarily go as hoped or planned, and so I'm going to fix those things going forward. I think that this reinforces this concept that triathlon is like this journey that you embark on. So it's something that you're stepping into, and not necessarily something that is just like, boom, I succeeded. So I believe that if you can get to that point where you can kind of think of it that way, I think it's going to alleviate a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on you. And I don't think that you're going to feel as afraid of either stepping into the sport or stepping up in the sport. Highly encourage you to take that approach and to work on that. So if I had to summarize this episode, I'd summarize it in 3 main bullet points. Fitness is built through training. It's not something that we already have. Confidence is built through experience. And consistency is what carries you forward. I think those are the 3 key takeaways from this conversation in this episode. So what I want to encourage you is, if you don't need to be ready or to feel ready. You don't have to have it already figured out. All you have to do is you just have to start. So if that's where you are and you would like some help, feel free to reach out to me. I am actively bringing on athletes onto my roster. So if this is something that you would like to investigate and you would like some help with it, I'm more than happy to talk with you and see, and talk about how we can work together and how, I can help you along in your journey. If you just have questions and you're not necessarily ready for a coach, but you just have questions, feel free to send those as well. I'm happy to help any way that I possibly can. You can leave comments with the video. You can send me messages. You can go to tabularasaracing.com and you can check it out there and send me messages there, or look for answers there, because there's tons of content on that website as well, with different blogs and videos and articles and everything else that's out there. Maybe there's an answer to your questions there. If you have enjoyed this video and you've learned something, or if you're listening to this on the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, please consider leaving a review or a comment, and those are greatly appreciated. If you have stumbled across this video but you don't know about the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, I am one of the co-hosts of the podcast, along with Coach Katie Cassane from Fort Collins, Colorado, who is a registered dietitian and a run coach as well. And this is also being disseminated through the podcast. And so I hope that you have gotten through this video and you've learned something and you have a new appreciation for the sport, or it's helped you kind of wrap things up. And he's like, okay, based on this, I'm ready. Let's just do this. I'm tired of sitting on the sidelines and I'm just going to pull the trigger. But if you want help navigating the process, whether it be training and preparation for your first race, that's exactly what I do at Tabula Rasa Racing. So if you'd like to reach out, I'm happy to help any way that I can. So again, thank you for the time that you have spent with me. Thank you for the continued support. If you've been listening to these episodes, or you followed my journey through Ironman Florida 70.3, or you've followed the podcast and you've been consuming those episodes, that's great. I cannot thank you enough and cannot convey the appreciation that I have for your continued support. So thank you so very much. Again, if you've enjoyed this, please leave a review and a comment. Those are greatly appreciated and help so much. Until next time, I've been your host, Coach Justin from Tabula Rasa Racing, with the Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, episode 3. Happy training. That's it for today's episode of Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, an endurance athlete journey podcast series. Remember, you don't need to have everything figured out right now. Progress in triathlon comes from consistency, patience, and taking the right next step. If something you heard today sparked a question or gave you a little more confidence, that means you're moving in the right direction. Stick with this series as we continue breaking down triathlon one step at a time, building confidence before distance, and focusing on a process that actually fits real life. Until next time, trust the process, keep showing up, and remember, you're becoming an endurance athlete long before you ever cross that finish line.